G'day, I'm Alister Christie from Delphi.tv, and I have a video that I produced over 3 years ago, but never got around to publishing, for various reasons. It's a step-by-step guide on how to build a Notepad clone in Delphi, a project I have fondly named Notepad. If you find this video useful, please consider liking and subscribing. Additionally, please check out my books, Code Faster in Delphi and Code Better in Delphi, available for purchase on my website, LearnDelphi.tv. I hope you enjoy this video on how easy or hard it is to implement Notepad in Delphi. Welcome to this introductory lesson on Delphi programming. I'm Alister Christie from LearnDelphi.tv. I'm an Embarcadero MVP and I've been programming in Delphi for a very long time. For this lesson, we're going to build a clone of the classic Windows application Notepad. While this is a simple application, it still has quite a lot of functionality that we will need to emulate. But as you will see, Delphi can make this very easy and we will not need to write too much code at all. We will start by creating a Windows VCL application. This application will only work on Windows and takes advantage of the Win32 API, making it extremely fast and efficient. We could also build a multi-device application if we wanted our app to be cross-platform. There are also numerous other types of Delphi project which you can get to from the File, New, Other menu. But we'll stick with a VCL app. Let's save our project into a new folder. We'll call our form unit frm.notepad and our project file .notepad. We are going to need to add 3 visual controls to our application: a tMain menu, a tStatus bar, and a tMemo. The status bar is automatically aligned to the bottom, but we will want to align the memo to client so that it fills the remaining space. We will also set the form's caption property to the notepad. Notice how the menu for the form has automatically been set to the main menu that we added. The form's name can be changed to the highly generic frm main, and let's also remove the default text within the memo. If we look at the Notepad application, we see the status bar, memo, and main menu. We are going to need to build a similar menu structure in our application, although we'll skip a few items for brevity. To edit the menu structure, we can double-click on the main menu 1 control. We will want to create a number of menu items, but rather than create most of them manually, we'll take advantage of the predefined templates for creating the file and edit menus. Format and help we will create manually, and we will assign the shortcut keys by prefixing a character with an ampersand. H for help and O for format, as F is already taken by file. We can compare our menu structure with that of Notepad. The file menu is more or less the same, and I'm going to say close enough. The edit menu needs a bit of work. It's missing a few, including delete, date, time, and select all. Format is currently empty, so we'll need to fix that, and I'll probably ignore the view menu completely. And on the help menu, we'll just do the about box. I'm going to quickly update the remaining menu items so that they more closely match those in Notepad. We can save the changes to our project by clicking the Save All button and check out how it looks by running it. While the GUI is looking pretty good, there is no behavior behind any of the menu items. For instance, if I click the Open button, it should open a dialog and so on. We can close our application in the Delphi IDE, and you'll see it listed in the Recent Files list. We can also make it a favorite so that it is easier to find later. We have now built the GUI to the Notepad. There is still a bit of work, but it is fully recognizable as a Notepad clone. Our next task is to make our GUI do things by writing some code. However, Delphi has some predefined behaviors called actions, and we'll take advantage of these to reduce the amount of code we need to write. Let's open our project from our list of favorites. We're going to add a number of predefined actions to our application, and to do this we will add an action list. To add actions, we double-click on the action list. We could add plain actions, but we will use the more exciting standard actions, as these are the ones with predefined behaviors. We will need a number of file actions, and all of the edit actions, and the ability to change the font from the Format menu. We can see the actions have been categorized into groups based on the category property of each action. We can now hook up the actions to the menu items. We do this by selecting each menu item and assigning its action property to the corresponding action in the action list. I've also missed a few search actions, so I've added these also. You'll notice that we don't have actions for all our menu items, and for these we will need to attach some code shortly. We can run our application to test it out. We'll notice that many of the actions work straight away, such as many of the edit actions. For instance, I can paste some random text, and you can see that certain menu items are disabled if no text is selected. The find action mostly works, but you can't see what has been found unless the main form is active, as you can see by searching for the letter T. From the File menu, Open and Save bring up dialogues, but nothing happens when you select the file. If we untick the Hide Selection property on the memo, this will make the selection remain visible when the memo is not the active control, which will fix our problem with find. While we are here, let's just check that replace also works, and indeed it does. The find next action currently doesn't work either, but this is easily fixed by setting its search find property to our find action. We can search for an X, provided the cursor is before one of them. Then we can use the Find Next menu item and also its F3 shortcut. It's probably time that we made the File Open menu item work correctly. We can start by setting some of the properties on the dialog box, in particular the default extension and filter properties, so that we only see text files when we open the dialog. When we select a file, we want it to load into the memo. This can be done in the onAccept event for the File Open action, and we just call the Load from File method on the lines property of the memo. We then pass in the file we selected in the dialog using its filename property. We can now run and test our changes by loading a file into the Notepad. You can see that the files are now filtered correctly, and we only are showing text files. I'm just using the text I add to the end of each of my YouTube videos, and it works just fine, as does word wrap, although we can't turn it off yet. Next up, Save As. Save As is very similar to Open, and we will want many of the properties to be the same. We'll just copy and paste the default extension and filter properties. To save out the contents of our memo to a file, we again use the onFileAccept event, this time on the File Save As action, and instead of using Load from File, we use Save to File. And a quick demonstration by running our application does indeed confirm that our code works. However, you will notice that the filename property between the dialogs is not synchronized, and the File Open dialog remembers the last file we opened rather than the last file we saved. Other than this minor issue, we see that both Open and Save As are now working. To make the dialogs use the same file name, I'm going to introduce a file name field on the field, which we will be extending later. And I'll just update the existing code to make use of this field. Next, when we accept a file in a dialog, we'll update the file name property in its counterpart. When we test this, we see that both dialogs now share the same file name property, or at least keep each other up to date. If we look at Windows Notepad, we notice that it's displaying the file name of the file we're editing. So let's implement this behavior. I'm going to do this by changing our file name field to a property. It will read the existing string, but when we change it, the set file name procedure will be called. And in set file name, I'm going to update the caption. So if a file name is present, I'll display it, but without its lengthy path. And we can test this by running it and checking that both open and save as update the application's caption, which indeed they do. There are still a few items in the file menu that we haven't yet implemented, in particular new and save. New should be fairly easy, so let's start with that. We just want to clear the file name property and clear the contents of the memo. This works fairly well, but the open and save as actions still remember the last file they used. I'm going to fix this by setting both in the set file name procedure. That way everything will be synchronized. A quick test by running the application confirms that things now work as expected. The File Save menu item is fairly straightforward, but instead of using the click event on the menu item like we did with new, we'll add an action instead. We'll name our action File Save and set its caption property with a shortcut. We can set the action property on our Save menu item to the action we just created. In the onUpdate event, we'll make sure that the action is only enabled when there is a file name set. In the onExecute event, all we need to do is save like we did in Save As. To test this out, I'll set a breakpoint in the code to confirm that when we click Save, we are indeed saving, and we can see that the application has stopped. There are some easy wins in the Format menu, in particular the font selection. We just need to attach the standard font dialog action we added earlier. In its onAccept event, we just need to change the memo's font to the one we selected. And we can test this easily by loading a document and changing its font. For word wrap, we will need another action. This time we will use the shortcut from the menu item to create one and update its properties. In the onUpdate event, we will synchronize the checked property of our action with the word wrap property of the memo. And in the execute event, we will just toggle the word wrap property of the memo. Action 1 is not a very helpful name for our word wrap action, so let's rename it to word wrap. Updating the name will rename any events, but not any references in the code, which we will have to change manually. And we can test this, and the check mark beside our menu item is updating correctly, and clicking it does change the word wrapping. However, we are missing some scroll bars. Adding scroll bars is just a matter of changing the corresponding property on the memo control. For now, we'll add both horizontal and vertical. While the scroll bars work fine, it's also broken our word wrap feature. It's the horizontal scroll bar that's done this. We only want it visible when word wrap is disabled. We have word wrap enabled by default, so let's only have the vertical scroll bar enabled by default. When we change the word wrap property of the memo, we can change the scroll bars at the same time so that they don't interfere with each other. Now when we run our application, both the scroll bars and word wrap behave as expected. In the Edit menu, we have this time/date option, which inserts the current time and date. This should be pretty easy to implement. Somewhere along the line, my desktop has gotten a bit stretched. I can reset it by reselecting the default layout. We can implement the time/date function directly from the Edit menu. All we need to do is replace the selected text with a string representation of the current time and date. We'll use some formatting options. The T represents the short time format, and the 5 Ds represents the short date format. If no text is selected, the time and date will be inserted at the cursor position. Otherwise, any text will be replaced. We also want to make the shortcut key to be F5, just like in Notepad. Running the application, we see that we can indeed insert the time and date, as well as replace any selected text. The next menu item we'll have a go at is GoTo. It only works if word wrap is disabled. The input box only supports numbers, although we might just ignore anything that's not a number. To implement GoTo, we will need another action, which we will call GoToLine, rather creatively, and assign it to the GoTo menu item. In its onUpdate event, we will disable it if word wrap is enabled. The onExecute event is going to be fairly long. We first need to prompt the user and ask for a line number. That line number is a string, so we will want to convert it to an integer so we can use it. We'll use the str.intDef function to do so, with any invalid input becoming -1. Finally, we will go to that line number using this convoluted method. The perform method, with the em line index as a parameter, will return the character position within the memo of the start of the specified line number. We subtract 1 from the line number, as the first line in the memo is 0, but we want to pretend that it's line 1 for the user's benefit. We can click Run, fix any mistakes, and try again. By adding a number of lines, we can test the GoTo with a number of different values, and it seems to work just fine, even with invalid input. As you can see, GoTo is disabled as we have word wrap turned on. Let's turn it off, and we can now use GoTo. GoTo line 3 works just fine, and if we use any invalid inputs, they are ignored. I've noticed that I've missed assigning a number of shortcuts, such as Control-H for replace. Control-N for new, Control-S for save, and additionally Control-Shift-S for save as, or Shift-Control-S. And because I have a bit of a lazy streak, we'll ignore printing for now. This just leaves us with the About menu item to implement. It's probably a good time to save, so let's start with that. To implement our About screen, we'll create a new VCL form. On this form, we'll add an image control, and in its picture property, we'll load a suitable image. We'll set its auto size property to be true and find a suitable location for it. We need something to display our About text, so let's drop a memo on the form, and we can reuse my YouTube standard text and size everything to fit. Let's make the memo read-only, remove its border, and set the background color to match the form. We will also want a close button, for which we will set its caption and name properties appropriately. We'll also adjust some form properties by setting the auto size property to true and give the form some padding so the controls are not hard up against the edges of the form. back to our close button, and in the on-click event, we'll close the form. We'll now save our form as FRM about. Next, we can set the caption and name properties of the form. If we head back to our main form, we can use the FRM about unit, which will allow us to access its contents. In particular, we can now implement our About menu item, which will just show the About form. There are just a few other properties on our About form that I'd like to adjust. In particular, we'll make the form appear in the screen center. Changing the border style to dialog will remove the minimize, maximize, and application icon buttons from the form's caption bar, make the caption bar thinner, and prevent resizing of the form. I'm just going to double check that the About form is automatically created by going into the project properties and checking the application forms screen. And finally, let's run our application and check that the About form actually works. In the status bar for Notepad, it displays the line and column for the cursor position. I think we should also implement this. We'll be lazy and make this the only thing to appear on the status bar. This means we can set the simple panel property to true and just use the simple text property to update the status bar caption. In the onKeyUp event for the memo, we can use the memo's parrot pos property to update the status bar's caption by setting the simple text property. We will want to add 1 to the X and Y values because they are indexed from 0, and we want our first line and column to be 1. We can run and test this by loading our standard file. Using the keyboard does correctly update our status bar, but mouse clicks do not. Let's cut this piece of code and replace it with a procedure called update status bar, which we will create. In it, we will paste our piece of code, then create a onMouseUp event for the memo, and also call update status bar from there. Now, when we run our application, the status bar is updated on both keyboard and mouse activity. Congratulations! If you've followed this far, you should have a working Notepad application. There are still many enhancements we could make, such as an installer or custom application icons, and I did miss the GoTo keyboard shortcut. But on the whole, it's looking pretty good. I'm Alister Christie. I hope you've enjoyed building this simple VCL application.